Hello, we are going to be working on the Bohr model of an oxygen atom today. So please make sure that you have a pencil and some colored pencils. I specifically am going to be using purple for electrons, green for neutrons, and orange for protons. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's define some of these words first though. So an atom, it's the smallest particle of a substance that can exist alone or in combination. By in combination, we mean it can be coexisting or living, well, they're not alive, but existing alongside other atoms. All right. So protons, these are subatomic particles that are part of the nucleus. So let's just do this in bullet points to make things easier. So protons are going to be the orange particles that we have here in the nucleus of the atom. They have a positive charge they're in the nucleus. They have an atomic mass, which is shortened down to AMU, so an atomic mass worth 1. And in this oxygen atom here, we are going to end up having 8 protons. So we'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and let's say 6, 7, 8, somewhere in there. The spacing will make more sense in a minute when we get to neutrons. So we have our protons in there. Again, each one of these guys has a positive charge. They are responsible for why we have positive sides of magnets. So if you've ever used like a bar magnet and you see a positive side and a negative side, the reason why we have a positive side is because of these guys here. There's all sorts of positively charged protons. Next, we're going to use our green pencil. We're going to be talking about neutrons. Now, neutrons, we would say they have no charge. So they're not positive, but they're also not negative. They're just neutral. These are found in the nucleus as well, in the nucleus of the atom. And they have an atomic mass of 1 also. And in this oxygen atom here, we are going to have 8 neutrons. It's very common to find the same number of neutrons as you do protons in an atom. That doesn't always happen, but it's fairly common. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, let's say 6, 7, 8. So the reason I'm partially drawing these neutrons is to kind of give you the idea that some of these neutrons will exist behind the protons and vice versa. Because really, if we were doing this, if we were looking at this in a three-dimensional way, it wouldn't just be a flat bunch of dots side by side. It would be more like a cluster of grapes. So you would see them existing in 3 dimensions that way. So that's why I'm drawing it the way I am, is because they exist more like a cluster of grapes. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 neutrons. So in the center here, we have 8 neutrons. And we have 8 protons. So our AMU, and I'm just going to use a regular pencil for this, our AMU, 8 plus 8, would be 16. So 16 AMU total. So there's 16, a mass of 16, or 16 particles in the nucleus of the atom. So the nucleus is the area that we just basically drew here that has the protons and the neutrons. So the nucleus is the central part of an atom that is made up of protons and neutrons. All right. And before we add electrons, let's talk about orbits. Orbits are the paths, or you could think of them like train tracks or like lanes on a highway, where the electrons, which we're going to learn about in a moment, that's where they travel. So orbits, they're the, let's call them lanes, like lanes on a road or lanes on a highway, where electrons move around the atom. And so we have our first orbit here and our second orbit here. All right. Now let's get to electrons. Now, electrons have a negative charge. They're negative. So protons were positive, positive charges here. The greens are no charge. They're not positive, they're not negative. Electrons are negative. They are orbiting the nucleus and their AMU, I know a lot of you are probably thinking is 1. Actually, we count them as 0. So in reality, they do have mass to them, but their mass is so small that when we're making these kind of general calculations, we actually count it as 0. So there is 16 total AMU here. We have our 16 particles in the center. And now we're going to have, we had 8 neutrons in the center, 8 protons. We're also going to have 8 electrons. So here's 1 electron. And in reality, electrons are much smaller than protons and neutrons. Much smaller, like thousands of times smaller. So 1 electron, 2 electrons moving around the atom. But we have a problem. On these orbits, there's a maximum capacity. In other words, there is a limit to how many electrons can be in this orbit. And this orbit closest to the center of the atom has a max of 2 electrons. only 2 electrons fit here. And since oxygen has 8 total electrons, there's 6 left that we have to put now in this other ring. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So there's 6 electrons moving around there. This next ring has a max of 8. So you could actually fit 2 more electrons in this second lane, this second orbit out here if you really wanted to. And that does happen. When you learn more about bonding, you'll learn that electrons can move to and from these outer rings from one atom to another. So let's go over again one more time all that we've learned. So an atom, it's the smallest particle of a substance that can exist alone or in combination. It's the smallest part you can get. So let's say this was like an atom of gold, for example. You could break a piece of gold, break a piece of gold, break a piece of gold, and so on, until you get down to a single atom of gold, and then you could break that atom of gold. But once you break that last atom of gold, you don't have gold anymore, because gold has to have a certain combination of protons, neutrons, and electrons. So once you smash that final atom, you don't have that thing anymore. You don't have gold anymore, or oxygen, or carbon. You have a different part of matter. Now protons, these guys, the orange guys here, have a positive charge. They're in the nucleus, the center area of the atom, and each one of them has an AMU of 1. Neutrons have no charge. They're also in the nucleus, and they have an atomic mass of 1 as well. Electrons have a negative charge. They orbit the nucleus, and they have an AMU of 0 because they are so incredibly small. The nucleus, again, is here in the center. That's where the protons and neutrons are. And these orbits are the lanes that have a maximum capacity, like a high upper limit, where the atoms move around. And in that first circle, that first orbit, you can only have 2. In the next one, you have a max of 8. But in this case, we only have 6 electrons in this second orbit. So we have 8 protons, 8 neutrons, and 8 electrons for a total of 24 total particles. So I hope this helps. I hope it helps you understand the structure of atoms, and make sure that you talk to your teacher if you have any questions.